When construction worker Carlos Mendez's excavator struck something metallic beneath the Riverside Diner parking lot on March 15, 2023, he thought he'd hit an old septic tank. But as more dirt cleared away, chrome bumpers and red paint emerged from the Nevada desert soil. What Carlos had discovered would crack open a 25-year-old mystery and expose a betrayal so devastating that it would redefine everything law enforcement thought they knew about organized crime in the American trucking industry. But the story that's about to unfold doesn't begin with that shocking discovery. It starts with a phone call on a snowy February morning in 1998. A conversation that seemed perfectly routine, but would launch one of the most baffling disappearances in FB1 history. And here's what makes this case absolutely extraordinary. The person responsible for Michael Rodriguez's death wasn't a stranger lurking on a dark highway. It was someone who sat at his kitchen table, someone who knew his children's names, someone he trusted with his life. Michael Rodriguez embodied the American dream in 1998. At 36 years old, he'd transformed himself from a warehouse worker, making minimum wage, into one of the Southwest's most respected independent truck drivers. His pristine red 1995 Kenworth, equipped with custom chrome exhaust stacks and his family's names painted in elegant script across the sleeper cab, was both his office and his pride. But Michael's real treasure wasn't his truck. It was waiting for him every night at their Phoenix home. Elena, his wife of 8 years, and their 2 children, 7-year-old Sophia, whose gap-toothed smile could melt his heart from 2,000 miles away, and 4-year-old Diego, who insisted on wearing a toy trucker hat to bed because I want to be just like Daddy. February 12, 1998 started like every other day for the past 3 years. At exactly 6 a.m., Michael's weathered hands dialed home from a truck stop payphone in Flagstaff, Arizona. Morning, beautiful, his deep voice carried across the crackling, long-distance connection. How's my family today? Elena Rodriguez smiled as she balanced the cordless phone against her shoulder, simultaneously packing Sophia's school lunch and warming Diego's bottle. At 32, she learned to read the subtle nuances in her husband's voice during these sacred morning check-ins. We're good, mi amor. Sophia lost another tooth last night. She's convinced the tooth fairy brings more money when Daddy's on the road. Michael's laugh echoed through the phone lines. Tell her Daddy will bring something special from Colorado. Speaking of which, his tone shifted slightly, becoming more serious. Dispatch assigned me a new route today. They say it'll cut 3 hours off my usual run to Denver. Elena paused in her lunch packing routine. In 3 years of marriage to a long-haul trucker, she'd developed an instinct for danger that most truckers' wives possessed, but never talked about. A new route? You've been running the same path to Denver for months. Why change it now? Danny Castillo, you remember him, the young dispatcher who started last year? He says Mountain Star Freight is trying to optimize fuel costs. New route goes through some back roads in Nevada, but it's perfectly safe. Just different. What Michael couldn't possibly know was that Danny Castillo had spent the past 6 months studying Michael's routes, his cargo schedules, and most importantly, his unwavering trust in company dispatch instructions. Danny had been waiting for exactly the right load, the right timing, and the right opportunity to spring a trap that had been months in the making. You sound tired, Michael. Are you getting enough sleep in that truck? Just thinking about the new route, that's all. But hey, Michael's voice brightened with the forced optimism Elena had learned to recognize when he was trying to reassure her. More money means I can take that long weekend off next month. Maybe we can finally take the kids to Disneyland like we promised. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the February morning. Michael, if something doesn't feel right about this route, it's fine, Elena, I promise. Danny says it's perfectly safe, just quieter than the interstate. Look, I need to get moving if I'm going to make Denver by tomorrow evening. I love you. I love you too. Call me tonight at 8, okay? Promise me. Promise. Give the kids a kiss from Daddy. The line went dead, leaving Elena standing in her kitchen with a growing sense of unease that she couldn't quite explain. In 12 hours, that unease would explode into full-blown terror when 8 p.m. came and went without Michael's nightly call. To understand why Michael Rodriguez's disappearance made absolutely no sense to anyone who knew him, you need to understand who Michael really was. This wasn't just another truck driver hauling freight across America's highways. This was a man who'd turned trucking into an art form. Born in El Paso to parents who'd crossed the border with nothing but hope and determination, Michael learned early that success in America required perfect execution. His father, Roberto, had worked double shifts in a steel mill for 30 years. His mother, Carmen, cleaned office buildings at night while raising four children during the day. Michael's trucking career began in 1989 when he was 27, newly married to Elena, and desperate to escape the cycle of minimum wage jobs that trapped so many in his neighborhood. He'd saved every penny for 2 years to attend commercial driving school, then spent another 3 years driving for other companies while saving to buy his own rig. By 1995, Michael had achieved his dream: owner-operator status with his own Kenworth and exclusive contracts with Mountain Star Freight. But success hadn't changed his fundamental character. Michael remained the same methodical, family-focused man who'd impressed his driving instructors with his attention to detail and safety protocols. Michael's safety record was legendary in the trucking community. 8 years, 750,000 miles, zero accidents, zero traffic violations, zero late deliveries. His truck was maintained like a Swiss watch, every component serviced ahead of schedule, every surface polished to mirror brightness. Fellow drivers at truck stops would joke that you could perform surgery on Michael's engine block. But it wasn't just his mechanical perfectionism that made Michael special. It was his absolute reliability in every aspect of his life. Elena often told friends that Michael was obsessively predictable, and she meant it as the highest compliment. Every morning at 6 a.m., he called home. Every evening at 8 p.m., he called to say goodnight to the kids. Every Sunday, regardless of his location, he found a Catholic church for Mass and called home afterward to share what the priest had talked about. In 6 years of marriage, Michael had never missed a birthday, anniversary, or important family event. When Sophia was hospitalized with pneumonia in 1996, Michael drove straight through from Portland to Phoenix, 1,200 miles in 18 hours. Arriving at the hospital still wearing yesterday's clothes but carrying Sophia's favorite stuffed animal that he'd somehow remembered to grab before leaving Oregon. When Diego took his first steps in November 1997, Michael was in the middle of a delivery run to Albuquerque. He turned around, drove home to Phoenix, spent 2 hours playing with his son, then drove back to Albuquerque to complete his delivery, all without asking for additional compensation or deadline extensions. This was not a man who simply disappeared. This was not a man who abandoned his family. This was not a man who made impulsive decisions or took unnecessary risks. At 7:45 a.m. on February 12, 1998, Michael Rodriguez guided his red Kenworth out of the Mountain Star Freight Terminal in Phoenix, hauling 38,000 pounds of computer equipment bound for Technocore Industries in Denver. The cargo manifest listed the load's value at $285,000, significant but not unusual for Michael, who regularly transported high-value electronics and pharmaceutical shipments. What was completely unprecedented was the route Danny Castillo had assigned him. For the past 18 months, Michael had taken the same path to Denver, Interstate 17 north through Phoenix to Flagstaff, then Interstate 40 east to Albuquerque, then Interstate 25 north to Denver. It was a well-traveled, well-lit corridor with truck stops every 40 to 50 miles, excellent cell phone coverage, and 24-hour emergency services. The route was longer than some alternatives, but Michael preferred it because of the safety factors. His insurance rates were lower because of the reduced accident risk. Mountain Star Freight preferred it because their GPS tracking systems worked flawlessly along the interstate corridors. But on February 12th, Danny Castillo handed Michael a completely different route, a shortcut through remote Nevada highways that would allegedly save him 3 hours and Mountain Star Freight approximately $400 in fuel costs. The new route was complex and unfamiliar. Highway 93 north through Nevada to Highway 6 east to Highway 95 north, then back to Interstate 25 in Colorado. It would take Michael through some of the most isolated territory in the American West, long stretches of desert highway with minimal traffic, limited cell phone coverage, and truck stops spaced 100-plus miles apart. Danny explained the route change as part of Mountain Star's new efficiency initiative, designed to maximize profits during the economic uncertainty of the late 1990s. Several other drivers had supposedly tested the route with excellent results. What Michael didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that Danny Castillo had never worked for any other trucking company. His resume was fabricated, his references were criminals, and his true employer wasn't Mountain Star Freight. Danny Castillo was a 28-year-old infiltrator working for an organization that federal investigators would later call the network the most sophisticated truck hijacking ring the FBI had ever encountered. For 18 months, Danny had been embedded at Mountain Star Freight, studying drivers, learning routes, and identifying the most profitable targets for systematic robbery. The network's methodology was elegant and nearly undetectable. Rather than staging dramatic highway robberies that attracted immediate law enforcement attention, they used insider information to divert high-value loads to remote locations where drivers would be dealt with and cargo would disappear into underground distribution networks. Michael Rodriguez, with his valuable computer cargo, predictable habits, and complete trust in company dispatch instructions, represented the perfect target. Danny had been planning this specific operation for 4 months. The final confirmed sighting of Michael Rodriguez came at 11:52 a.m. on February 12th, when he pulled his red Kenworth into the Frontier Gas and Go truck stop in Tonopah, Nevada. Security cameras captured him performing his characteristic pre-fuel inspection, checking tire pressure, examining his load straps, and walking completely around his rig before beginning the fueling process. At the pump, Michael struck up a conversation with another driver, a detail that would prove crucial to the investigation 25 years later. Jerry Matthews, a 51-year-old veteran driver from Sacramento, was fueling his own rig when Michael pulled up to the adjacent pump. Jerry later told investigators that Michael seemed slightly uneasy about something. "Nice-looking truck," Jerry commented, nodding toward Michael's pristine Kenworth. "Don't see many independents keeping their rigs that clean." "Thank you, sir. My father always said if you take care of your tools, they'll take care of you." Michael smiled, but Jerry noticed he kept checking his watch and looking around the truck stop parking lot. "You seem a little antsy, brother. Everything okay?" Michael hesitated before answering. "Just running a new route today. First time through this territory. My dispatcher says it's faster, but..." He shrugged. "Sometimes the old ways are old for good reasons, you know?" Jerry Matthews would replay that conversation thousands of times over the next 25 years, wondering if there was something more he should have said or done. At the time, he simply offered practical advice. "Well, if you're taking Highway 6 East, be careful around mile marker 47. There's been some construction work lately, and the road surface is pretty torn up. Also, cell phone coverage gets spotty once you're about 20 miles past Ely." "I appreciate the heads up." Michael extended his hand. "Michael Rodriguez, Phoenix, Jerry Matthews, Sacramento. Safe travels, Michael." They shook hands, completed their fueling, and went their separate ways. Jerry headed west toward California. Michael drove east toward a fate that would mystify investigators for 25 years. Inside the truck stop convenience store, Michael purchased his usual road supplies: a large black coffee, a turkey sandwich, a bag of sunflower seeds, and a calling card to phone home later. Store clerk Betty Morrison, a 47-year-old local who'd worked the morning shift for 12 years, remembered him clearly. He was polite, soft-spoken, said yes, ma'am, and thank you. Like his mother raised him right, Betty later told investigators. Seemed like a real gentleman. Asked me about the weather forecast and if there were any road construction delays between here and Ely. At 12:17 p.m., security cameras captured Michael walking back to his truck, performing another visual inspection of his load, and climbing into the cab. At 12:23 p.m., his red Kenworth pulled out of the Frontier Gas and Go parking lot and merged onto Highway 6 East. Michael Rodriguez was never seen alive again. According to Michael's logbook and the route Danny Castillo had provided, the next fuel stop was the Desert Inn Truck Plaza in Ely, Nevada, approximately 168 miles east on Highway 6. At his normal cruising speed of 62 miles per hour, Michael should have arrived in Ely by 4 p.m. At 4:30 p.m., when Michael hadn't appeared at the truck stop, Clerk Tommy Valdez called Mountain Star Freight to report the delay. Danny Castillo took the call personally. "Mr. Rodriguez is probably just running behind schedule," Danny told Tommy with practiced concern. "There's been some strong cross winds in that area today, and he's hauling a pretty heavy load. I wouldn't worry unless he's more than 2 hours late." At 6 p.m., Tommy called again. Danny's tone remained calm and reassuring. "Still no word, but that's not unusual. Sometimes drivers have to pull over for mandatory rest breaks when they're fighting bad weather. I'm sure he'll be there soon." At 8 p.m., Elena Rodriguez was standing in her Phoenix kitchen, staring at the phone and fighting a growing sense of panic. Michael had never, not once in 3 years of long-haul trucking, missed his nightly call home. Elena immediately called Mountain Star Freight. Danny Castillo answered on the second ring, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I was just about to call you. Michael hasn't checked in with the Ely truck stop yet, but I want you to know this isn't necessarily cause for alarm. Radio dead zones are pretty common in remote Nevada, and drivers sometimes have to stop for weather or mechanical issues. Michael would find a way to call," Elena insisted, her voice tight with fear. "He promised me. He always keeps his promises." "I understand your concern, and I'm taking this very seriously," Danny replied with practiced sympathy. "I've already contacted our emergency response coordinator. If we don't hear from Michael by morning, we'll initiate a full search protocol." What Elena didn't know was that Danny was sitting in his apartment, looking at detailed maps of the Nevada desert and mentally calculating how long it would take for the network to complete their operation and dispose of all evidence. The search for Michael Rodriguez began at first light on February 13, 1998. Nevada State Police deployed 2 helicopters, 4 patrol units, and a volunteer search and rescue team to scour every mile of Highway 6 between Tonopah and Ely. Lead investigator Detective Sarah Walsh had coordinated dozens of missing person searches during her 15-year career, but the Michael Rodriguez case defied every logical explanation. The search teams found absolutely nothing. No skid marks on the highway pavement, no signs of mechanical failure or tire blowouts, no evidence of an accident, breakdown, or roadside emergency. Michael's 75-foot red Kenworth tractor trailer, a vehicle that should have been impossible to miss on a straight desert highway, had simply vanished without leaving a single trace. It was like the truck had been lifted off the road by aliens, Detective Walsh later told FBI investigators. "We covered 168 miles of highway with helicopters, ground units, and volunteer teams. Nothing. Not even a cigarette butt or a coffee cup that might have been thrown from his window." The investigation revealed something that made the disappearance even more puzzling. No other drivers remembered seeing Michael's distinctive red Kenworth on Highway 6 that day. In the close-knit trucking community, where drivers regularly communicate via CB radio and help each other with directions, mechanical problems, and weather updates, it was virtually impossible for a truck to travel 168 miles without someone noticing it. CB radio logs from February 12th showed normal chatter among drivers on Highway 6, but no mention of Michael's truck, no request for assistance, no reports of breakdowns or accidents. Detective Walsh expanded the search to cover over 800 square miles of Nevada desert. Search teams checked every mine shaft, every abandoned building, every dirt road that branched off Highway 6. Aviation units flew detailed grid patterns for 6 days, using both visual searches and thermal imaging equipment designed to detect vehicles or human remains. The investigation revealed one more unsettling detail. Highway 6 through central Nevada is one of the most monitored stretches of road in the American West. The Nevada Department of Transportation maintains traffic cameras every 25 miles, and the Nevada test site operates additional security cameras along several sections of the highway. None of these cameras had recorded Michael's red Kenworth passing through their coverage areas on February 12th. Detective Walsh began developing a theory that seemed impossible, but was the only explanation that fit the evidence. Michael Rodriguez had never actually traveled on Highway 6. Somehow, somewhere between Tonopah and his intended destination, he'd been diverted to a location that wasn't on any official map. While police struggled to find any trace of Michael Rodriguez, Danny Castillo was methodically destroying evidence and preparing for the inevitable investigation. The network had been perfecting their operations for 8 years, and Danny's infiltration of Mountain Star Freight represented their most sophisticated inside job to date. The network had originated in the early 1990s when three career criminals, Walt Brennan, Marcus Webb, and Vincent Vinny Carrera, realized that truck hijacking could be far more profitable and less risky than traditional robbery if they used insider information instead of random highway attacks. Walt Brennan owned the Riverside Diner, a truck stop restaurant on Highway 95 about 40 miles northeast of Tonopah. The location was perfect for their operations, remote enough to avoid unwanted attention, but positioned on a highway that connected to multiple interstate routes. Marcus Webb was a former truck driver who lost his commercial license after a DUI conviction in 1991. His knowledge of trucking logistics, route planning, and industry communications made him invaluable for planning operations. Vincent Carrera was a professional mechanic with documented connections to organized crime families in Las Vegas and Los Angeles. His job was modifying stolen vehicles and developing methods for disposing of evidence. The network's breakthrough came when they realized they could place operatives inside trucking companies as dispatchers, mechanics, or office workers. These inside sources would identify high-value loads, study driver habits, and create opportunities for interception. Danny Castillo was their third successful infiltration. His fabricated resume and fake references had gotten him hired at Mountain Star Freight in August 1997. For 6 months, he'd studied the company's operations, identified the most profitable targets, and waited for the perfect opportunity. Michael Rodriguez represented that perfect opportunity. Valuable cargo, predictable habits, complete trust in dispatch instructions, and most importantly, a route that could be easily modified to bring him directly to the network's trap. The modified route Danny had given Michael included one seemingly minor deviation that proved fatal. Instead of staying on Highway 6 all the way to Ely, Michael was instructed to turn north on Highway 95 at a junction about 40 miles east of Tonopah. Danny had told him this shortcut would save time and fuel. In reality, this deviation brought Michael directly to the Riverside Diner, where the network was waiting. Michael arrived at the Riverside Diner at approximately 2:15 p.m. on February 12th, expecting to meet another driver who supposedly had updated route information for the final leg to Denver. Danny had told him that weather conditions were changing and local drivers had recommended route modifications. Walt Brennan met Michael in the diner parking lot, playing the role of a helpful local trying to assist a lost trucker. Walt directed Michael to park behind the diner, claiming that the front parking area was reserved for customers and that truck drivers usually use the rear lot. What Michael didn't know was that the rear parking area had been carefully prepared for exactly this type of operation. Hidden from highway view by the diner building, equipped with a large pit that had been excavated months earlier, and positioned so that any activities would be completely invisible to passing traffic. The ambush was swift and professional. As Michael climbed down from his cab to meet the local driver, who supposedly had route information, 3 men emerged from concealment: Marcus Webb, Vincent Carrera, and a fourth man named Pete Sullivan, a former Mountain Star Freight employee who'd been fired 2 years earlier for theft. Michael immediately recognized Pete Sullivan, and in that moment, he understood that he'd been deliberately targeted. This wasn't a random highway robbery. This was an elaborate setup orchestrated by people who knew his routes, his schedule, and his trust in company instructions. Michael Rodriguez wasn't the type of man to surrender without a fight. At 5'10" and 185 pounds, with arms strengthened by years of wrestling heavy cargo and maintaining his truck, Michael was physically capable of defending himself. When Pete Sullivan approached with a gun drawn, Michael grabbed a tire iron from his truck's tool compartment and fought back with desperate fury. The struggle lasted several minutes, during which Michael managed to seriously injure Vincent Carrera with a blow to the head and nearly escaped to his truck. But the odds were overwhelming. Michael was eventually overpowered, beaten unconscious, and dragged into the diner's back room for interrogation. The network's standard procedure was to knock drivers unconscious, steal their trucks, and abandon the drivers in remote locations where they would eventually be found by other travelers or law enforcement. Most victims survived these encounters with stories of being robbed by unknown highway bandits. But Michael Rodriguez's case was different. His recognition of Pete Sullivan meant he could identify at least one member of the network. More critically, his desperate fight had demonstrated that he wasn't going to simply accept his fate without causing problems. During his interrogation in the diner's back room, Michael was questioned about what he'd told his wife about the route change, whether he'd mentioned Danny Castillo's name to anyone, and who else might know about his modified travel plans. Michael refused to provide any information that might endanger Elena or his children, but he also made it clear that he understood exactly what was happening to him and who was responsible. Danny Castillo set me up, Michael told his captors. Mountain Star Freight is going to figure this out eventually. You can't make drivers disappear without someone noticing patterns. Walt Brennan realized that Michael Rodriguez was too smart, too observant, and too determined to be safely released. The decision was made to eliminate him permanently. During the chaos of his capture and the confusion of moving him from the parking lot to the diner, Michael had managed to retrieve a small notebook from his shirt pocket. While his captors were distracted with securing his truck and discussing their next moves, Michael wrote a brief but crucial message. Working quickly with a pencil stub he'd grabbed from his truck's cab, Michael wrote, "Danny Castillo, dispatcher betrayed me. The network operates from Riverside Diner Highway 95. Tell Elena and kids I love them. They're going to kill me." Michael folded the note tightly and managed to slip it inside his wallet, hoping that someday, somehow, someone would find it and expose the truth about his disappearance. The network had spent months preparing the Riverside Diner for operations like the Michael Rodriguez job. The restaurant appeared to be a legitimate business, complete with proper licensing, regular customers, and a reputation for serving decent food to truckers and travelers on Highway 95. But beneath the surface, Walt Brennan had created a sophisticated criminal operation designed to process stolen trucks and eliminate evidence. Behind the diner, hidden from highway view, the network had constructed an elaborate vehicle processing facility. A large pit capable of holding tractor trailers had been excavated and lined with concrete. Industrial equipment for cutting apart vehicles was stored in a reinforced concrete building disguised as a maintenance shed. The system was designed for efficiency and complete evidence elimination. Stolen trucks would be driven into the pit, where they would be systematically dismantled. Valuable cargo would be loaded into unmarked vans for transport to underground markets in Las Vegas and Los Angeles. Vehicle parts would be sold to salvage yards across multiple states. Any evidence that couldn't be sold or disposed of safely would be buried in additional pits around the diner property. Michael's Red Kenworth was processed with the same ruthless efficiency the network had perfected over 8 years of operations. The $285,000 computer cargo was loaded into Vincent Carrera's van for transport to buyers in California. The truck's chrome accessories and custom details were removed for individual sale. But instead of completely dismantling the vehicle, Walt Brennan made a decision that would prove fatal to the network's operation 25 years later. The truck's cab, still containing crucial evidence, was simply driven into the burial pit and covered with dirt and concrete. Brennan believed that advances in tracking technology would eventually make the network's operations too risky to continue. He planned to close the diner and relocate to Mexico within a few years, leaving the buried evidence to remain hidden forever beneath the Nevada desert. Detective Sarah Walsh's investigation into Michael Rodriguez's disappearance encountered obstacle after obstacle during the winter and spring of 1998. Every lead seemed to evaporate. Every potential witness had seen nothing. Every piece of evidence pointed nowhere. The FBI was called in after 2 weeks when it became clear that the case involved interstate transportation and possible organized crime. Special Agent James Morrison, no relation to Michael, took over the investigation with a team of federal agents experienced in truck hijacking cases. The problem was that the network had operated for years without leaving traditional evidence patterns. Unlike highway robbers who struck randomly and left witnesses, the network's operations were carefully planned, precisely executed, and designed to make victims simply vanish without traces. Agent Morrison's team investigated every truck stop between Phoenix and Denver. They interviewed hundreds of drivers, mechanics, and truck stop employees. They analyzed CB radio communications, reviewed security camera footage from dozens of locations, and even consulted with military experts on vehicle tracking technology. The investigation revealed some disturbing patterns. Michael Rodriguez wasn't the first driver to disappear while hauling valuable cargo through remote southwestern highways. Between 1992 and 1998, at least 12 other drivers had vanished under similar circumstances. But every investigation had hit the same dead end. No witnesses, no physical evidence, no connection between the various disappearances except the fact that all involved valuable cargo and remote highway routes. Danny Castillo submitted to voluntary FBI questioning in March 1998, providing detailed information about Michael's route assignment and expressing appropriate concern for his missing colleague. His story was consistent, his emotions seemed genuine, and his background check revealed nothing suspicious. What the FBI didn't know was that Danny's entire identity had been carefully constructed by the network. His social security number was legitimate, but belonged to a deceased infant. His previous employment history was fabricated but supported by criminals posing as former supervisors. His apartment lease and utility bills were real, but the money came from network operations. 3 weeks after Michael's disappearance, Danny Castillo submitted his resignation to Mountain Star Freight. He told his supervisor that his mother in California had been diagnosed with cancer and needed full-time care. Danny's departure was noted but not investigated. Employee turnover in the trucking industry was high, and dispatchers frequently moved between companies for better opportunities. His resignation seemed perfectly normal. What law enforcement didn't realize was that Danny Castillo was preparing to disappear completely. The network had protocols for extracting operatives whose covers might be compromised, and Michael Rodriguez's disappearance had attracted more FBI attention than anticipated. Danny's extraction was methodical and professional. He closed his Phoenix apartment lease, transferred his few legitimate belongings to a storage unit, and purchased a bus ticket to Los Angeles under his real name, David Hernandez. For 25 years, investigators would assume that Danny Castillo was either dead or living under deep cover in a foreign country. They were wrong on both counts. Elena Rodriguez spent the first year after Michael's disappearance in a state of desperate hope mixed with growing despair. She organized volunteer search parties, hired private investigators, and personally traveled to Nevada multiple times to distribute missing person flyers and interview truck stop employees. The not knowing was torture. Elena couldn't grieve properly because she didn't know if Michael was dead or alive. She couldn't move on with her life because he might come home. She couldn't explain to Sophia and Diego why Daddy wasn't calling anymore. Sophia, at 7 years old, developed elaborate theories about where her father had gone. Maybe he was on a secret mission for the government. Maybe his truck had broken down in a place with no telephones. Maybe he was helping other truckers who were in trouble and couldn't leave until everyone was safe. Diego, at 4, simply asked every night when Daddy was coming home to read bedtime stories. Elena found herself lying to her children. Not maliciously, but out of a desperate need to preserve their hope and innocence. Daddy's truck broke down in a place where it's hard to make phone calls, she would tell them, but he's trying to get home to us. By 1999, Elena was facing financial crisis. Michael's truck payments, insurance premiums, and business expenses continued even though he wasn't generating income. Mountain Star Freight had paid some benefits, but independent truckers didn't have the same safety nets as company employees. Elena was forced to sell Michael's truck to cover debts, a decision that felt like giving up on him completely. The red Kenworth that had been his pride and joy was sold to another driver who promised to maintain it properly and honor Michael's memory. In 2000, Elena made the heartbreaking decision to have Michael declared legally dead so she could access his life insurance and provide stability for Sophia and Diego. The legal process required her to acknowledge that Michael was probably never coming home. By 2005, the Michael Rodriguez case had joined thousands of other unsolved disappearances in FBI cold case files. Occasional leads would emerge: sightings of red trucks, reports of amnesia victims in hospitals, tips from psychics and well-meaning citizens, but none led to breakthroughs. Detective Sarah Walsh retired in 2010, taking with her detailed institutional knowledge about the network's patterns and methods. Agent James Morrison transferred to cybercrime in 2008, convinced that advancing technology would eventually solve cold cases like Michael's. Elena remarried in 2006 to a kind man named Robert Martinez, who understood her tragic past and never asked her to forget Michael. Sophia graduated high school in 2009 and became a teacher like her mother had always dreamed of being. Diego, following an unexpected path, became fascinated with criminal justice and enrolled in the police academy in 2012. "I want to help other families find their missing loved ones," Diego told Elena during his graduation ceremony. "Dad's case is still out there waiting to be solved, and maybe I can help solve cases like his." The network had dissolved by 2001 when increased law enforcement attention and advancing truck tracking technology made their operations too risky. Walt Brennan sold the Riverside Diner to local investors and moved to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, where he lived quietly on his criminal proceeds until his death from a heart attack in 2015. Marcus Webb died in a car accident in Las Vegas in 2003. Vincent Carrera was murdered during a drug deal gone wrong in Los Angeles in 2007. Pete Sullivan served 5 years in federal prison for an unrelated fraud conviction and died of liver failure in 2019. By 2020, it appeared that everyone connected to Michael Rodriguez's disappearance was dead, and the truth would remain buried forever in the Nevada desert. What law enforcement didn't know was that Danny Castillo, whose real name was David Hernandez, had been living and working in plain sight for 25 years, just 300 miles from the scene of his crime. After leaving Phoenix in 1998, David had relocated to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he'd used his trucking industry knowledge to build a legitimate career as a freight coordinator for Southwestern Logistics. His new identity was only partially fabricated. He used his real name and social security number but created a false employment history that didn't include Mountain Star Freight. David's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than fleeing to a foreign country or assuming a completely new identity, he'd simply moved far enough away to avoid casual recognition while staying close enough to monitor any developments in the Rodriguez investigation. Mountain Star Freight had paid some benefits, but independent truckers didn't have the same safety nets as company employees. Elena was forced to sell Michael's truck to cover debts, a decision that felt like giving up on him completely. The red Kenworth that had been his pride and joy was sold to another driver who promised to maintain it properly and honor Michael's memory. In 2000, Elena made the heartbreaking decision to have Michael declared legally dead so she could access his life insurance and provide stability for Sofia and Diego. The legal process required her to acknowledge that Michael was probably never coming home. By 2005, the Michael Rodriguez case had joined thousands of other unsolved disappearances in FBI cold case files. Occasional leads would emerge: sightings of red trucks, reports of amnesia victims in hospitals, tips from psychics and well-meaning citizens, but none led to breakthroughs. Detective Sarah Walsh retired in 2010, taking with her detailed institutional knowledge about the network's patterns and methods. Agent James Morrison transferred to cybercrime in 2008, convinced that advancing technology would eventually solve cold cases like Michael's. Elena remarried in 2006 to a kind man named Robert Martinez, who understood her tragic past and never asked her to forget Michael. Sofia graduated high school in 2009 and became a teacher like her mother had always dreamed of being. Diego, following an unexpected path, became fascinated with criminal justice and enrolled in the police academy in 2012. "I want to help other families find their missing loved ones," Diego told Elena during his graduation ceremony. "Dad's case is still out there waiting to be solved, and maybe I can help solve cases like his." The network had dissolved by 2001 when increased law enforcement attention and advancing truck tracking technology made their operations too risky. Walt Brennan sold the Riverside Diner to local investors and moved to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, where he lived quietly on his criminal proceeds until his death from a heart attack in 2015. Marcus Webb died in a car accident in Las Vegas in 2003. Vincent Carrera was murdered during a drug deal gone wrong in Los Angeles in 2007. Pete Sullivan served 5 years in federal prison for an unrelated fraud conviction and died of liver failure in 2019. By 2020, it appeared that everyone connected to Michael Rodriguez's disappearance was dead, and the truth would remain buried forever in the Nevada desert. What law enforcement didn't know was that Danny Castillo, whose real name was David Hernandez, had been living and working in plain sight for 25 years, just 300 miles from the scene of his crime. After leaving Phoenix in 1998, David had relocated to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he'd used his trucking industry knowledge to build a legitimate career as a freight coordinator for Southwestern Logistics. His new identity was only partially fabricated. He used his real name and social security number, but created a false employment history that didn't include Mountain Star Freight. David's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than fleeing to a foreign country or assuming a completely new identity, he'd simply moved far enough away to avoid casual recognition while staying close enough to monitor any developments in the Rodriguez investigation. The note, written in Michael's careful handwriting that Elena would immediately recognize, consisted of just 23 desperate words. Danny Castillo, dispatcher, betrayed me. The network operates from Riverside Diner Highway 95. Tell Elena and kids I love them. They're going to kill me. Agent Santos realized that Michael Rodriguez had managed to leave behind a roadmap to solving his own murder. The note identified his killer, the criminal organization responsible, and the location where the crime had occurred. The investigation was no longer a missing person case. It was a homicide investigation with a clear suspect and specific leads to follow. FBI investigators began their search for Danny Castillo with the assumption that he was either dead or living under a completely false identity in a foreign country. The network's other known members had all died years earlier, and Danny's trail had gone completely cold after his 1998 departure from Phoenix. But Agent Santos's team was working with technology that hadn't existed in 1998. Advanced database searches, facial recognition software, and social media analysis capabilities gave them tools that the original investigators couldn't have imagined. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered that Danny Castillo had been an assumed identity. Employment records from Mountain Star Freight contained fingerprints from Danny's hiring paperwork, and those fingerprints matched a man named David Hernandez, who'd been arrested for minor traffic violations in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2019. The arrest had been routine, a speeding ticket that David had initially planned to contest in court. When he provided fingerprints as part of the court process, those prints had been entered into state databases that FBI investigators could now access. Agent Santos's team realized that their 25-year fugitive had been hiding in plain sight, living under his real name just 300 miles from the scene of his crime. Rather than immediately arresting David Hernandez, the FBI decided to conduct surveillance to determine if he had any remaining criminal associates or ongoing illegal activities. Agent Santos wanted to ensure they captured the full scope of any continuing criminal enterprise. The surveillance revealed a man living an apparently normal, law-abiding life. David worked regular hours at Southwestern Logistics, coached his daughter's soccer team, and attended church with his family every Sunday. But FBI behavioral analysts noted subtle signs that David was constantly looking over his shoulder. He varied his daily routines randomly, always parked where he could see multiple exit routes, and seemed hyper-aware of his surroundings in ways that suggested someone living with long-term paranoia. Phone surveillance revealed that David had been monitoring news coverage of missing truck drivers for 25 years. His computer searches included frequent queries about unsolved crimes, FBI cold case investigations, and advances in forensic technology. He's been waiting for this day, Agent Santos told her team. He knows that eventually someone would find that truck and connect it back to him. He's been living in fear for 25 years. On April 18, 2023, FBI agents arrested David Hernandez at his home in Albuquerque. The arrest was carried out early in the morning to minimize trauma to his wife and children, who had no knowledge of his criminal past. David's reaction to the arrest surprised investigators. Rather than denying involvement or demanding a lawyer, he seemed almost relieved that his 25-year deception was finally over. During his interrogation, David provided detailed information about the network's structure, methods, and victims. His confession revealed a criminal organization that had been far more extensive and deadly than investigators had realized. We targeted trucks carrying electronics, pharmaceuticals, and luxury goods, David told Agent Santos. The total value of cargo we stole was probably over $50 million, but the real profit came from the vehicle modification and resale operations. David's confession revealed that the network had been responsible for at least 18 truck driver disappearances between 1992 and 2001. Most drivers had been murdered to prevent identification of network members, and their bodies had been disposed of in remote mine shafts across Nevada and Arizona. Michael Rodriguez wasn't supposed to die, David continued, his voice breaking with what appeared to be genuine remorse. The plan was to knock him unconscious, steal his truck, and abandon him in the desert like we'd done with other drivers. But he recognized Pete Sullivan from Mountain Star Freight, and everything went wrong. David's confession revealed that Michael had fought back more fiercely than anyone anticipated. During the struggle, Michael had managed to seriously injure Vincent Carrera and nearly escaped to his truck where he could have radioed for help. After that, Walt Brennan said we couldn't let him live. Michael was too smart, too observant. He would have been able to identify all of us and describe our operation in detail. David's detailed confession painted a picture of Michael Rodriguez's final hours that would haunt everyone who heard it. Even facing death, Michael had refused to provide information that might endanger his family or other drivers. We questioned him about whether he'd told anyone about the route change, whether his wife knew about Danny Castillo, whether other drivers might come looking for him, David revealed. Michael wouldn't tell us anything useful. He just kept saying that good people would eventually figure out what happened and make sure we paid for our crimes. During his captivity, Michael had somehow managed to write his final note and hide it in his wallet without his captors noticing. The note demonstrated that even while facing death, Michael was thinking about protecting future victims and ensuring that Elena and his children would eventually learn the truth. He was a better man than any of us deserved to face, David said, tears streaming down his face. He died trying to protect other people, and we killed him for it. I've lived with that guilt every day for 25 years. David's confession also revealed the location of Michael's body, a mine shaft approximately 40 miles northeast of the Riverside Diner. Acting on this information, FBI search teams recovered Michael's remains in May 2023, finally allowing Elena and her children to lay him to rest properly. During preparation for David Hernandez's trial, prosecutors discovered that they had an unexpected ally. Jimmy Kowalski, now 44 years old and a successful business owner in Las Vegas. Jimmy had been following news coverage of the Rodriguez case discovery, and when he saw David's photo on television, he immediately recognized him as one of the men he'd seen threatening a truck driver on a remote Nevada highway in February 1998. Jimmy contacted the FBI and provided a detailed statement about what he'd witnessed as a 19-year-old college student driving home for spring break. His description of the vehicles, the location, and the men involved matched perfectly with the evidence that had been recovered from the Riverside Diner site. I've regretted not stopping to help that man every day for 25 years, Jimmy told Agent Santos. When I saw the news reports about Michael Rodriguez and realized that I'd witnessed his kidnapping, I knew I had to come forward. I can't change what I didn't do back then, but I can make sure his family gets justice now. Jimmy's testimony would prove crucial to the prosecution's case, providing independent confirmation of David's confession and establishing a timeline that matched all other evidence. David Hernandez's trial began in September 2023. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His detailed confession, the physical evidence from Michael's truck, and Jimmy Kowalski's eyewitness testimony created an unbreakable case. But the most powerful moment in the trial came when Elena Martinez took the witness stand to provide victim impact testimony. For 25 years, I've wondered what happened to my husband, Elena told the court, looking directly at David Hernandez. I've wondered if he suffered, if he was afraid, if he thought about us in his final moments. Your confession answered those questions, and while the truth is painful, it's also brought me peace. Elena's testimony revealed the devastating impact that Michael's disappearance had on their family. Sophia had struggled with abandonment issues throughout her childhood and had difficulty forming relationships as an adult. Diego had become obsessed with criminal justice, driven by a need to understand what had happened to his father. You didn't just kill my husband, Elena continued. You stole his children's father, their sense of security, their belief that good people are protected from evil. You forced us to live with uncertainty and fear for 25 years. But I want you to know that Michael's goodness survived your evil, Elena concluded. He raised children who became teachers and police officers. He inspired other people to help missing person families. His final note ensured that you would eventually be caught and punished. In the end, Michael Rodriguez was stronger than all of you. David Hernandez was convicted on multiple charges, including first-degree murder, conspiracy, racketeering, and organized criminal activity. In October 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. David Hernandez's confession and the evidence recovered from the Riverside Diner site prompted the largest investigation of truck driver disappearances in FBI history. Using information from David's detailed records, investigators identified 23 additional missing person cases across 6 states that could be linked to network operations. Search teams began systematic excavations at locations David had identified, recovering the remains of 7 additional murder victims and solving cold cases that had mystified law enforcement for decades. The investigation also led to significant improvements in trucking industry security protocols. New regulations required enhanced GPS tracking systems that couldn't be easily disabled, mandatory check-in procedures for drivers on remote routes, and comprehensive background checks for all dispatching personnel. Professional driver advocacy groups used Michael's case to push for federal legislation, providing better support for families of missing drivers and improved coordination between law enforcement agencies investigating transportation-related crimes. Michael Rodriguez's death led to changes that have probably saved hundreds of lives, said Detective Maria Santos, who had become a specialist in transportation crime investigations. His final note didn't just solve his own case. It exposed an entire criminal network and led to protections that benefit every truck driver in America. Where the Riverside Diner once stood, Frank Patterson completely redesigned his development project. Instead of simply building a truck stop, he created a memorial complex honoring Michael Rodriguez and the other drivers who lost their lives to the network. The centerpiece is a restored red Kenworth, identical to Michael's truck, permanently displayed under a covered pavilion. The bronze memorial plaque reads, "In memory of Michael Rodriguez and all professional drivers who never made it home. Your courage in the face of evil made America's highways safer for those who followed." The truck stop that Frank built around the memorial has become an unexpected pilgrimage site for drivers across the country. Many stop to pay their respects, share stories about highway safety, and remind each other that their protection depends on vigilance and communication. Elena Martinez, now a victim advocate specializing in missing person cases, often speaks at the memorial during annual remembrance ceremonies. Her message is consistent. Evil succeeds when good people choose to look away, but good people can triumph over even the most sophisticated criminals if they refuse to give up. Sofia Rodriguez, now a high school principal, uses her father's story to teach students about courage, integrity, and the importance of speaking up when something seems wrong. Diego Rodriguez, now a detective with the New Mexico State Police, has specialized in cold case investigations and has helped solve 12 missing person cases using techniques developed during his father's investigation. The Michael Rodriguez case became a catalyst for revolutionary changes in how law enforcement investigates missing person cases. The successful use of ground-penetrating radar, advanced DNA analysis, and database correlation techniques at the Riverside Diner site provided a template for solving other cold cases. FBI training academies now use Michael's case as a primary example of how persistence, technological advancement, and interagency cooperation can solve cases that seemed impossible using older investigative methods. The techniques developed during the Rodriguez investigation have been applied to hundreds of other cold cases across the United States. Advanced database searches have identified dozens of other criminals living under false identities, while improved excavation methods have led to the recovery of evidence from burial sites that had been considered permanently lost. Michael Rodriguez's case proved that there's really no such thing as a completely cold case anymore, explained FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Patricia Chen. Evidence doesn't disappear, it waits. Technology doesn't stop advancing, and somewhere someone is always working to improve the tools we use to uncover buried truths. While technology solved the technical aspects of Michael Rodriguez's disappearance, the case ultimately succeeded because of human choices. Jimmy Kowalski's decision to finally come forward, Carlos Mendez's recognition that he'd found evidence rather than debris, Elena's refusal to give up hope, and countless investigators who treated a 25-year-old case as if it had happened yesterday. All the technology in the world doesn't matter if people don't care enough to use it properly, reflected Agent Santos. Michael's case was solved by people who refused to accept that some questions can't be answered. The Rodriguez case demonstrates that justice often depends on ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Jimmy Kowalski's 25-year guilt about not helping a stranger led to testimony that convicted a killer. Carlos Mendez's decision to call police instead of simply moving buried debris led to solving multiple murders. Elena Martinez's transformation from grieving widow to victim advocate has helped dozens of other families navigate the nightmare of having missing loved ones. Her message to these families is consistent. Never stop asking questions. Never accept easy answers that don't make sense. Never let anyone convince you that your loved one doesn't matter enough to keep investigating. Today, Highway 95 through Nevada carries thousands of trucks every month. Enhanced communication systems, better tracking technology, and increased awareness of insider threats have made operations like the network nearly impossible to execute successfully. But Michael Rodriguez's red Kenworth, restored and displayed at the memorial site, serves as a permanent reminder that safety depends on more than technology. It depends on trust, vigilance, and the willingness of good people to protect each other from evil. Michael Rodriguez's story isn't just about a cold case solved or justice finally served after 25 years. It's about the price of trust, the power of persistence, and the reminder that evil succeeds when good people choose to look the other way. Jimmy Kowalski lived with regret for 25 years because he chose not to help when he witnessed something suspicious. His eventual decision to come forward proved that it's never too late to do the right thing, even when the consequences of past inaction seem overwhelming. David Hernandez's betrayal reminds us that the most dangerous threats often come from those closest to us. People who know our routines, our trust patterns, and our vulnerabilities. But his eventual capture proves that even the most sophisticated criminals can't escape the consequences of their choices forever. The construction workers who could have ignored the buried truck and continued their project chose instead to recognize evidence and call authorities. Their decision brought closure to multiple families and prevented other potential victims. In a world that sometimes seems full of David Hernandez's, choose to be like Michael Rodriguez, someone who fights for what's right even when it's dangerous. Choose to be like the investigators who refused to give up on a 25-year-old case. Choose to be like Elena Martinez, who transformed personal tragedy into a force for helping others. Because somewhere out there, another family is waiting for answers. Another construction crew might uncover something unexpected. Another cold case might be one phone call away from being solved. Another Jimmy Kowalski might finally find the courage to come forward with information that changes everything. The highway continues, and so does the search for justice. Michael Rodriguez's legacy isn't just a solved murder case or a memorial truck stop. His legacy is the reminder that good people, armed with determination and an unwavering commitment to truth, can ultimately triumph over even the most sophisticated evil. And sometimes, just sometimes, that triumph comes when you least expect it. Buried beneath a forgotten diner's parking lot, waiting 25 years for someone brave enough to dig deeper and uncover the truth that changes everything. Remember, if you see something that doesn't seem right, speak up. If you have information about a missing person case, come forward. If you're facing uncertainty about a loved one's disappearance, don't give up hope. Justice may be delayed, but it's never impossible when good people refuse to stop fighting for the truth. This incredible story of betrayal, persistence, and ultimate justice proves that some mysteries are worth waiting 25 years to solve. If this case moved you, please subscribe for more true crime investigations that demonstrate the power of never giving up on the search for truth. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into cases that remind us why justice, no matter how long delayed, is always worth pursuing. What cold case would you like me to investigate next? Share your suggestions in the comments below. Until then, stay safe out there, and remember, the road to justice is long, but every mile brings us closer to the truth.